Hello, everyone, and welcome, and thank you for joining us today. I have a very special guest here with us that we'll be interviewing. We have Lewis. He's a tax specialist, a retired tax specialist from the IRS, and we have a few questions for him that we're gonna go through and just get his perspective on the IRS and basically the internal workings of the IRS. So we'll go ahead and start off with our first question, Lewis. So tell us about yourself and how long you worked for the IRS.
Okay, I worked for the IRS about approximately 14 years. I started in 1983 as an intern with Internal Revenue Service as a revenue officer. And then after so many years, I went into the office as a taxpayer specialist. And then I also taught tax preparation for IRS through the government, working with what they call the former VITA program. And then I also did military taxation, our instructions at the Travis Air Force Base. So I've done a few little things with the IRS as far as preparing taxes and also collecting taxes. I'll put that on your list.
Okay, all right, well, good. So you'll be able to answer these questions. So what usually, based on your opinion and your expertise, so what usually triggers an audit for individuals and for business owners?
Well, number one, I was not an auditor, but I spoke with many auditors, okay, about different cases caseloads that we had. And it appears that one of the things that triggers an audit is bad bookkeeping. If you don't have the right bookkeeping instruments to keep track of what's going on, certainly that would, cause an audit, because they want to know how you arrived at these particular figures.
Right.
And those are the things that I, as a revenue officer at the time, we would get cases that were 2 to 3 years old. And time we got the case, the individuals already knew that they owed the tax, but they didn't have maybe the resources to pay the tax at the time that they were or should be rendered. But yet, good bookkeeping. It's not that we go out to look at your books. It's just that time we got the case, it has already been settled.
Right.
And so then we're not going out there to investigate the reason why. We know the reason why you didn't pay. So really, the question, I'm going to reinterpret this question for you, is the reason why people owe taxes. There's one thing that we've always said, there's two things that we must do: pay taxes and die.
Yeah, that's true. That is true.
And so then when you're talking about, I would say bookkeeping, the records would be the main thing that would trigger an audit, because things are not adding up properly.
Right. Okay. So if someone owes the IRS a lot of money, and are they willing to work, the IRS, are they willing to work with the individual or business to make payment arrangements?
Many times, yes. Many times, yes, because we're not in you see how I say we. It's kind of funny when people talk about IRS, I always say we, as I've been included in that even though I've been retired all these years, I always say we. But anyway, yes, they are willing to work with you. The question is that when people owe taxes, they're afraid to come forth. And that's where things become escalated.
Okay.
Because people are afraid to come forward and say, look, I made a mistake. I know I owe the taxes. How can we work this out?
Right.
They're willing to work things out with you many times. But the point is that it's not so much willing to work it out, but what can you do to stop it from reoccurring? That's the difference. Because see, as a revenue officer, we had to make sure, especially with businesses, we had to make sure that they catch up and not reoccur. Like all of a sudden you go year after year after year after year, and you're never able to stop the bleeding.
Right.
We have to teach them how to stop the bleeding. and then catch up the rear. And that's
Okay.
one of the things that in any situation, stop the bleeding and catch up the rear, so that now you're in good standings and you're a happy person, because now you worked the things out and they taught me what to do to go forth so it doesn't happen again.
Right, right. So are there any times when they might waive it or discharge it?
Yes, there is, but it's there was a statute that we have that if certain things were not paid in a certain amount of time, then they would waive it. But it doesn't mean that it's completely waived. It could come back 10 years later, but all those accrued interest and penalties, because those lives change.
Yeah.
See,
Yeah.
once something is waived, then they say, and it's set aside per se. And all of a sudden now they get a windfall in some form or
Right.
fashion.
Right,
Hey,
right, right.
those taxes, they want those taxes paid. So they can come back years later and they would reinvestigate it to see if anything's changed. And then at that point in time, then they would try to still work things out or set it aside again.
So is it ever in their best interest to maybe get an attorney?
It all depends what type of taxes we're speaking of. Or if we're talking about personal taxes, no. If you're even talking about business taxes, in many cases, they have CPAs that are trying to represent them to get things in a corrected way, to find a way to render the back funds that are owed. See,
Right.
and so it depends on who's doing what, if it's an individual or whether it's a company or whether it's a partnership or a limited life. It depends
Yeah.
on who you're speaking to and what type of taxes are owed.
Okay. Okay.
Because based upon the taxes that you're owed, this is an example. I know that you've seen companies says grand opening, and then all of a sudden, a year or two later, they're what? Grand closing. And you're asking yourself, what happened?
Yeah.
I can tell you 9 out of 10 cases as a revenue officer, many of them were taking funds that withholding from the employees for tax purposes. They were using it for company business. And
Oh, wow.
that's when we went in and basically, hey, closing them down. But then they come back with a new name.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
They come back with a new name. And then all of a sudden you say, okay, then we have to do it all over again. But it wasn't until 1988, I was still working with the IRS, that's when they came in what they call the 100% penalty assessment, not only against the company, but against the individuals. We're talking about presidents, we're talking
Right.
about all the officers, or even the CPAs, or even the attorneys.
Wow.
See, so
Okay.
they're trying to wrap this thing up because people are giving them information to try to get over on different things, but yet it created a bigger situation. That's how come you see some companies, it's the same companies, the same officers, the same everything, but it's a different
Different
name.
name. Yeah. Oh, I know what you're talking about. So tell me about what are your thoughts on people out there that believe the conspiracy theory that the IRS don't have a legal right to collect money?
Well, I've ran into a few of those as a revenue officer. Yes, we know that in the 1930s that's when the first taxation came into play. Yes, we understand that. But since it's already in play, what can you really do about it? Really, I mean, you're going to have those, but they're not conspiracies. They are basically individual groups that are fighting the IRS. And as revenue officer, I ran into a couple of them.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so it's interesting that we had to take some of those that see as a revenue officer, we weren't allowed to take guns. But then there are other departments that they were allowed to take guns.
Oh,
And
wow.
so we would say, hey, we may have a hostile here. We need a little bit of protection. And they would go out with us and they would go up to the door first and say, is there going to be any issues?
Oh my gosh, so you have to
It-
come up with guns a-blazing. The IRS
that's
agents come up with guns a-blazing, knocking on the door like the popo. Oh my gosh, that is too much. That is
yeah,
too
well,
much.
those are some of the situations that you may run into. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
I started my service in the South, and so you run into a lot of different people with different ideas, and
Right,
so
right.
yeah,
So what,
you're going.
so what do you think are the biggest mistakes that taxpayers make?
I think more of it is not understanding the system.
Right.
Um, I would say they make errors that if they understood, they wouldn't make the errors.
Mm,
For example, we're talking about, let's talk about a sole proprietor, for example. A sole proprietor is an individual that is trying to start a business on his own, and he doesn't understand the taxation and everything else. And so he got this mom and pop store. I'm using this as an example here, that he starts and he has his children work for him and different things like that, but they're paying them, but are they taking out federal withholdings or state withholdings or social security withholdings, all these different withholdings? And
hmm.
so many of them are not, because they're not aware of taxation. All they do is just want to run a business.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
this is where, as I was reading what you stood for and how that you were to help individuals to do these particulars, that's where I'm saying, okay, the first thing that I would do with them is make sure that they understand what type of business that they want to run. Many of
Right,
them want to run more of a sole proprietor, because they're not going to get into a corporate, a C corp, where they have over 100 shareholders or
right,
more,
right,
or
right.
C corp, because all these are interchangeable, because depending on what you're doing, that the government is looking at you and they're trying to put you into a box. What
Yeah,
type of box
yeah,
do you want to be in? Are you going to be a sole proprietor? Are you going to be a partnership? Are you going to be a LLC or C corp, S corp? All those are, as
yeah,
far as IRS concerned, as one and the same. Guess what? You pay taxes.
yeah. I see. Is there any kind of magic time frame where it's better to file your taxes as an individual, where you can escape an audit, so to speak?
No, no. IRS runs 24/7, okay? There's no, it's just a matter of time. If there's something wrong, that they will get to it. But I think you're asking me what triggers an audit.
Yeah, we talked about that.
Yes.
I thought maybe there was, there's some people that believe, hey, if you file your taxes at this time frame, you can avoid an audit. I wanted to make sure we
No,
cleared that up.
no, no.
Okay, okay.
There is no, because what, okay, for example, there are, they would to look at something, look at your tax return for 2020. You done 2.5, gone on 3 years ago, and you say, why are they looking at my 2020?
Yeah.
Because there may be some type of discrepancy, and they want to figure out what that discrepancy is. This is why, before they audit, do the complete audit, once they're reviewing it, they will take a look at it and they say, okay, why does this line doesn't come up to this line? In fact, I still do tax preparation for a few individuals, and he got a letter from IRS. This just happened last year, in fact. And they say, how come this line is different than this line? And when he sent me the letter, he's out of it, he's in a different state, okay? And
Hmm.
so when I looked at it, I went back and looked at the tax return. And so when I went back and looked at the tax return, I noticed that they were picking up a different figure. I'm talking about IRS was picking up a different figure.
Oh,
And they
gotcha,
didn't,
gotcha.
and they want to know how I got this figure. And I said, online, da da da, based upon this and this and this. That's how come. And when they saw it, they said, oh, that's why. See, so
Oh,
sometimes it's the individual auditor that's looking for something, but they're
mhm.
not picking up the right number from the right line.
Because there's humans behind everything.
That is correct.
That's right.
There are
That's right.
humans behind it. That's how come when he sent me the letter, I mean, he was, petrified to a point that he said, what is going on? I said, well, let me
Yeah.
take a look at it. And when I looked at it and I said, okay, they're looking at this. And when I went the whole tax return, I saw it. I say, based upon this and this, and then I sent them a copy of it. And I told them
Yeah,
to send this in. It was done, cleared, done, over with.
done deal. Okay,
Done
well,
deal.
what kind of advice can you give to taxpayers out there when they're preparing their return? Any good advice that we can share?
Well, this is what has happened now. Within the last couple of years, our tax law has changed. And people that used to receive refunds are no longer receiving those large refunds. And that has to do with the standard deduction.
Yeah,
See, when they see that standard deduction used to be around 2,000, and now it's about 12,000, I believe. And so then, when you're talking about the standard deduction going up, that knocks people out from writing off charitable contributions. It eliminated, as far as I'm concerned, it eliminated my hobby expenses as far as bowling. Okay, and I'm saying, to myself, wow, it really messed us up to a point that now people are owing. It's not that the government gave you anything. That's
right, right,
different.
right,
When they're
right,
talking about that standard deduction, it's not like they gave you anything.
right,
They
right.
just removed some of your deductions, and that's how
Right.
come it ended up only helping the wealthy and not those that are truly in need.
Yeah. Wow. That is amazing. Well, this has been such an insightful interview. I really appreciate it. And I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in and listening to this very insightful interview with IRS tax specialist Lewis. I hope this information was helpful and you are able to utilize this discussion to your benefit. The Everyday Daily Real Adult Nonprofit Learning Organization has several other seminars posted on our website at www.TEDRANonprofit.learning.org. For the everyday adult navigating through life challenges and processes, please visit our website and take a look at our resources to help you with understanding various processes and situations. So I really do appreciate your insight and you sharing your stories with us and in the audience. So thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.